She was standing in the most beautiful dress she had ever worn in her life. 2 years of saving. 2 years of sacrifice. And it was perfect. The ivory silk, the pearl embroidery, the delicate straps. Every detail chosen with the kind of care that only a woman who has had to fight for every beautiful thing she has ever owned truly understands. And then the door opened. No knock, no warning. The sister of the Korean mafia boss walked in like she owned the room. Like she owned the air inside it. Like she had already decided what was going to happen next, and the only thing left was for everyone else to catch up. She looked at the black bride, this stunning, extraordinary black woman who had built herself from nothing, who had crossed an ocean for the man she loved, and she smiled. And then she poured champagne across that dress like it was nothing. Like she was nothing. And when the silk was stained and ruined, when the golden liquid was spreading across 2 years of sacrifice, she grabbed the strap, and she tore it. "Accidents happen," she said, "especially to people who have mistaken where they are for somewhere they belong." She walked out, and that black bride stood alone in front of a mirror, in a destroyed dress, in a city that was not her city, holding the only thing that still felt like home. A tiny gold bracelet with her late mother's name on it. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She picked up the phone. And what happened in the next 40 minutes? What the Korean mafia boss did when he found out? It was something that 240 people in that wedding hall will never forget for the rest of their lives. Neither will you. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a member and help our channel. There are rooms in this world that were never built for certain people to stand in. Not because of the architecture, not because of the materials, the marble, the jade, the gold-threaded curtains that caught the morning light filtering through tall windows and threw it back in warm, broken pieces across the floor. The room itself had no opinion. Rooms never do. It is the people inside them, the ones who built them, who paid for them, who decided who deserved an invitation and who deserved a seat near the back. Those are the ones who decide who belongs. The Grand Joseon Hotel had stood in the heart of Seoul for 41 years. It had hosted the dinners of politicians who later became prisoners. It had hosted the weddings of daughters from families whose names appeared in newspapers only when something went terribly wrong. It had hosted the birthday celebrations of men who smiled for photographs and then walked into back rooms where very different conversations happened. Conversations that were never written down, because the people having them understood that certain agreements live longer when they exist only in the memory of the men who made them. On this particular morning, the hotel was dressed for a wedding. 240 white chairs had been arranged in perfect rows inside the main ceremonial hall. Down the center aisle, a path of white orchids and pale magnolia blossoms had been pressed flat against a runner of ivory silk, each flower placed by hand, each one inspected twice by the event coordinator, a small and precise woman named Park Ji-hyun, who had been coordinating weddings at this hotel for 17 years, and who had never, not once, allowed a single petal to face the wrong direction. The chandeliers above were enormous, 3 of them hanging at descending heights, casting the entire hall in a warm amber that made everything look slightly golden, slightly dreamlike, slightly like the kind of place where ordinary rules did not fully apply. On the guest list, consuls, heirs, advisors, and men whose official titles bore no resemblance to their actual function in the world. There were women in dresses that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, and there were men who had made decisions in the past decade that had redirected the flow of money through half a dozen countries without a single press release. They had come because Kwon Jun-ho had asked them to come. And when Kwon Jun-ho asked, the word no did not occur to most people as a viable option. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, seated in their chairs and adjusting their cuffs and leaning toward one another with murmured observations about the floral arrangement, was that at this exact moment, in the bridal suite on the 14th floor, the wedding was quietly coming apart. She was standing in front of a mirror. Celeste Renee Washington, 29 years old, born in Atlanta, Georgia, raised by a woman who cleaned other people's houses 6 days a week and made sure her daughter's school uniform was pressed every single morning without exception, was standing in front of a floor-length mirror in a suite that cost more per night than her mother had ever earned in a month. And she was not thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the pulsera, the thin gold bracelet on her left wrist, the one engraved with her mother's name in letters so small you had to hold it to the light to read them. She was thinking about how her mother had never made it to 47. She was thinking about how she had promised, standing at a graveside in the Georgia heat 3 years ago, that she would not shrink. She had not shrunk. The woman in the mirror was extraordinary. Tall, slender, with skin the deep, rich color of polished ebony that caught the suite's warm light and gave it back richer, warmer, more alive. Her natural hair rose in a full, generous crown around her face. And her face was the kind of face that people looked at and then looked at again. Not because it was theatrical, but because it was completely, quietly, devastatingly itself. Full lips, eyes the color of amber, a stillness in her expression that other people sometimes mistook for coldness, but was, in truth, the particular composure of a woman who had learned very young that the world would test her constantly, and that the only dignified response was to meet every test without flinching. She was wearing a gown of Italian silk, off-white, almost cream, with thin straps and a back that opened into an architecture of pearl embroidery. Each pearl placed individually, each one sewn by the same woman in Milan who had sewn gowns for 3 brides who later appeared on the covers of international magazines. A 1-meter train pooled behind her on the marble floor like a second shadow, white and slow and ceremonial. She had saved for 2 years to buy that dress. Her dama de honra, Priya, 28, fierce, the kind of friend who shows up at 2 a.m. with food and questions and absolutely no patience for self-pity, was standing 3 feet behind her, hands pressed together against her mouth, eyes bright with something that was trying very hard not to become full tears. Cece. Her voice was hushed, reverent. My God, he is going to stop breathing when he sees you. Celeste laughed. A real laugh, low and warm, and the kind that came from somewhere deep in the chest, the kind you cannot manufacture. She turned to reach for the small clutch on the vanity, burgundy, beaded in gold, a thing of considered beauty. And at that precise moment, the door to the suite opened. No knock. The door simply opened, the way doors open when the person on the other side has decided that your permission is not required. Kwon So-yeon moved through the doorway with the particular grace of a woman who had spent her entire adult life being the most dangerous person in rooms where everyone else believed they were the most dangerous person. She was 31 years old, dressed in emerald green silk that moved around her like something alive. her black hair immaculate, her expression arranged into something that resembled warmth, the way a painted window resembles actual light. She held a champagne flute loosely between two fingers. She had barely touched it. "Celeste," she said. Her English was careful, deliberate, shaped around the edges with the particular control of someone who has practiced it as a weapon. "We need to speak. The two of us. Alone." Priya did not move. "It's all right, Pri." Celeste said it quietly, without looking away from the mirror. "Give us a minute." The door closed. The two women were alone. So-Yun moved around the room the way a person moves when they are conducting an inspection rather than paying a visit. Slowly, with her eyes traveling across surfaces, pausing at the dress, at the clutch, at the bracelet. When she finally spoke again, her voice had dropped into something quieter and more honest, which somehow made it more dangerous. "You are very beautiful," she said. "It is unfortunate that beautiful is not enough." Celeste watched her in the mirror. She did not answer. "My brother is the head of the Quan organization." So-Yun's voice was the kind of calm that is assembled rather than felt. Built piece by piece, deliberately, the way a wall is built. "You understand what a non-Korean wife means to our alliances, to the other families. You understand what you will cost him. That is why this cannot happen." Celeste turned from the mirror then. She faced So-Yun directly, with that stillness that was not coldness, but something older and harder and more permanent than coldness. "Are you finished?" she asked. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. So-Yun raised the champagne flute, and the golden liquid arced through the air in a slow, glittering curve and landed across the ivory silk like a wound. The sound it made was almost nothing, a soft impact. The kind of sound that should not be able to carry the weight it carried, and yet the silence that followed it filled the entire room. Celeste did not move. So-Yun's hand came down and found the strap of the dress, and pulled. The pearl embroidery along the right side gave way with a sound that was small and final and irreversible, the way the sounds of irreversible things always are. "Accidents happen," So-Yun said. Her voice had not changed at all, especially to people who have mistaken where they are for somewhere they belong. She walked to the door. She opened it. She did not look back. And in the suite, standing in a ruined dress in front of a mirror, Celeste Renee Washington stood completely still for 30 full seconds. She touched the bracelet on her wrist. Then she picked up her phone, and she called the one person she needed to hear. And when he answered on the first ring, when his voice came through the line, low and steady and entirely present, she did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She said only this: "Your sister needs to be accountable for what she just did to me." And on the other end of the line, she heard Kwon Jun-ho go very, very quiet. That silence, that particular silence, was the sound of a man deciding who he was going to be for the rest of his life. There is a particular kind of silence that has nothing to do with the absence of sound. The hotel corridor outside the bridal suite was not quiet. Somewhere below, the string quartet hired for the ceremony was running through its final rehearsal, and the notes floated upward through the building like something beautiful that did not yet know what it was about to witness. Staff members moved through hallways with purpose and efficiency. A cart of fresh towels rolled past on rubber wheels. A telephone rang twice at the front desk and was answered before the third ring. None of it was silence. And yet, Kwon Jun-ho stood in the corridor outside the groom's preparation room, his phone still pressed against his ear long after the call had ended, and the world around him was absolutely, completely, structurally silent. Because the silence was inside him, and it was the kind that expands outward until it swallows everything it touches. His two personal guards, Park and Shin, stood 4 feet away. They had been with him for 6 years. They had stood beside him in rooms where guns were drawn, and in rooms where things more dangerous than guns were exchanged across tables. They knew every variation of his stillness. The stillness before a negotiation, the stillness before a verdict, the stillness before something happened that could not be taken back. This stillness was one they had never seen before. It was not the stillness of a man calculating. It was the stillness of a man who had already calculated, who had arrived at the answer with a speed that frightened even himself, and was now simply absorbing what the answer meant. He put the phone into the interior pocket of his jacket with a movement so controlled, it looked almost ceremonial. Then, he looked at Park. He did not need to say anything. Park had been reading his silences for 6 years and was fluent in all of them. "She is on the garden level," Park said quietly. "The Winter Garden. East Side." Junho walked. He did not run. The dragon did not run. Running was a confession of urgency, of desperation, of a situation that had exceeded your control. He had not been out of control since he was 19 years old, since the night his father sat across from him in a room with no windows and told him that the world was divided into 2 kinds of people: those who decided and those who had decisions made for them. His father had not been a good man, but that particular lesson had been accurate, and Junho had carried it like a blade ever since. He took the elevator. He straightened his cuffs on the way down. He looked at his own reflection in the polished steel doors, the black suit, the open collar, the edge of the dragon tattoo visible above the white shirt, the dark eyes that were doing something they almost never did, which was showing exactly what was happening behind them. He was in love with her. He had been in love with her for 2 years and 8 months, which was not a long time by most measures, and was an eternity by his. He had not believed, for most of his adult life, that he was the kind of person love happened to, not the sustained, inconvenient, restructuring kind, not the kind that made you look at your own life and find large sections of it suddenly insufficient. He had believed, without distress, that he was built for loyalty and precision and the specific cold satisfactions of power. And then Celeste Renee Washington had walked into a private dinner in Manhattan 16 months after they first met, wearing a blue dress and carrying an opinion about a bottle of wine that was so precise and so quietly confident that he had laughed, actually laughed, without performance. And something had shifted in him that had never fully shifted back. What So Young had done to her dress was not, in his mind, primarily a violation of a garment. It was a declaration. It was his sister standing in a room and announcing, in the only language she had ever truly trusted, the language of action, of consequence, of things done that cannot be undone, that she believed his love was negotiable. That she believed, if she applied the right pressure at the right moment, he would choose the familiar over the true. That she believed, somewhere beneath everything, that he was still the 19-year-old boy in the windowless room who had learned to survive by never letting anything matter too much. She was wrong, and he was going to tell her so. Not with volume, not with fury, but with the particular precision he had spent 15 years developing and had never, until this morning, aimed in her direction. The winter garden on the east side of the hotel was a long, glass-enclosed corridor lined with orchids and small ornamental trees whose branches had been trained over years into elegant, deliberate shapes. Morning light came through the glass ceiling in long, clean panels. It was the kind of space designed to make difficult conversations feel civilized, to wrap them in beauty so that the people having them might mistake the setting for permission to be cruel. So-Yun was standing near a large arrangement of white flowers, her back partially toward the entrance, one hand touching the petals of an orchid with the absent, proprietary gesture of a person who believes that everything within arm's reach belongs to them by right. Two of the clan's senior advisors, men in their 50s, men who had been present at every significant decision the Quan organization had made in the past decade, stood nearby, their conversation low and continuous, the specific murmur of men who process the world through calculation and have never found a reason to stop. So-Yun heard him coming. She always heard him coming. She turned. And in the instant before her expression assembled itself into something composed, he saw it. The flicker. The genuine one. The thing she had never been able to fully train away. It was not guilt. It was not defiance. It was something more complicated and more painful than either of those things. It was fear. Not of him. So-Yun had never been afraid of him, not once in 31 years. It was the fear of someone who has done something they cannot undo and has not yet decided whether they regret it. "Junho," she began. "Do not." His voice was quiet. Dangerously, completely quiet. The way a room goes quiet when the last candle goes out. She closed her mouth. He stopped in front of her. Not close enough to be threatening. Precisely far enough to be deliberate. "You poured champagne on her dress," he said. Each word landed separately, with space between them. "And then you tore it." "I protected you." Her voice was immediate, certain, and he recognized in it the particular tone she used when she had rehearsed something, when she had anticipated the confrontation and prepared her justification the way you prepare a weapon in advance, before you know exactly what you will need it for. "You know what the other families will say. You know what a non-Korean wife means to the alliances we have spent years building. I did what you were to—" "Careful," he said. She stopped. "You did not protect me," he said. "You humiliated the woman I love on the morning of our wedding, in a room where she was alone. And you did it because you are afraid." "I am not afraid." The words came out too fast. She heard it herself. "You are afraid," he said again, without alteration, without heat, with only the flat and patient certainty of a man stating something he has known for a long time and is tired of pretending not to know. "You have been afraid since the moment I introduced her to you. Not because of the alliances. Not because of the other families. I called Han Sung-jin this morning." Something changed in her face. "Han Sung-jin," he continued, "whose wife is from Manila and has been for 15 years, who told me, when I told him I was marrying Celeste, that his wife would like to meet her personally. Han Sung-jin, whose alliance is the most significant one we hold." He let that sit in the air between them for 3 full seconds. "The other families were never the problem, So-Yun. You knew that. You have always known that." Her jaw tightened. "Then what am I afraid of?" she asked, and her voice had lost some of its architecture, some of its careful construction, and underneath it was something raw, something that sounded uncomfortably like the truth trying to surface. "You are afraid," he said, "that she will love me better than you have been able to." and that I will finally understand the difference. The winter garden was silent except for the distant rehearsal of the string quartet, whose music had reached a passage of particular sweetness that seemed, in context, almost grotesque. So-yeon did not respond. He gave her the two options. He gave them to her without anger, without punishment in his voice. The way you give options to someone you still love even after they have wounded something precious to you. Because love and accountability are not opposites, no matter how much easier it would be if they were. She listened. Her face moved through several things. When he finished, he looked at her for one long, final moment. His sister, who had held his hand at their mother's funeral, who had stood beside him in rooms that would have destroyed most people, who had confused protection with possession for so long that she no longer knew where one ended and the other began. "I love you," he said. "That is why there is no second option." He turned and walked back toward the elevator. Behind him, So-yeon stood alone in the winter garden, her hand still hovering near the orchid she had stopped touching. The advisors now silent and carefully looking elsewhere. The morning light falling through the glass ceiling onto the emerald green of her dress in a way that made her look, briefly, like something trapped inside a beautiful container. The elevator opened. He stepped inside. He took out his phone and scrolled to a name he had never called with urgency before. A name that existed in his contacts as both a professional connection and an obligation of respect. And he pressed call. It rang twice. "Im Hyun-ja," said the voice on the other end. "This is Kwon Jun-ho," he said. "I need you at the Grand Joseon Hotel in 20 minutes. Bring everything you have." A pause. "Everything?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "And your best black fabric." Im Hyun-ja had been designing hanbok for 33 years. She had begun as an apprentice at 16, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her grandmother's workshop in Insadong, learning to cut fabric with a patience that her grandmother said was rare in young people, and rarer still in young people who were also talented. Her grandmother had told her, on the last day she was well enough to work, that the hanbok was not simply clothing. It was a conversation between the person wearing it and every generation that had worn it before them. It carried memory in its seams. It carried identity in its silhouette. To dress someone in a hanbok was to say, without words, "You are connected to something larger than this moment." Im Hyun-ja had dressed the daughters of ministers. She had dressed the wives of men whose names appeared in no official registry, but whose influence shaped the texture of daily life for millions of people. She had been commissioned by a hotel in Jeju to dress 12 women for a cultural ceremony that was later photographed and published in 4 international design publications. She had, twice in her career, been asked to create pieces for women who were not Korean. Women from Japan, from China, from the United States. And both times she had approached the commission with the same philosophy her grandmother had given her. The hanbok belongs to whoever is willing to carry its meaning with honesty. She had never received a call like this one. She arrived at the Grand Joseon Hotel in 19 minutes. Not 20. 19. She brought 3 assistants, 2 large leather trunks, and the particular expression of a woman who has decided that whatever she is walking into, she is prepared for it. The hotel staff met her at the service entrance because Jun-ho had called ahead, and she was taken immediately to the 14th floor, to the bridal suite, where the door was opened by a small, fierce woman named Priya, who looked at Im Hyun-ja with the specific gratitude of someone who has been holding a crisis together through sheer force of will and has just been handed reinforcement. Inside the suite, Celeste was sitting on the edge of a chair near the window. She was still in the ruined dress. She had not removed it. She had not called the hotel's emergency styling service. She had not wept, or paced, or done any of the things that the situation seemed to demand. She was sitting in the ruined dress, with the champagne stain dried to a pale shadow across the silk, and the torn strap lying against her arm like a broken promise. And she was looking out the window at the city of Seoul, at the towers and the Han River glinting in the distance, and the particular blue of the sky over a city that was not her city, that spoke a language that was not her language, that had its codes and its hierarchies and its ideas about who belonged at its center and who belonged at its margins. She was not broken. Anyone who looked at her and saw brokenness was not looking carefully enough. She was deciding. Im Hyun-ja set her trunks down without ceremony. She looked at the dress. She looked at Celeste. She did not offer condolences or commentary. She was a craftswoman, and craftspeople understand that there are moments when words are the wrong tool entirely. "Stand up," she said, in English that was accented and precise. "Let me see you." Celeste stood. Im Hyun-ja walked around her once, slowly, with the eyes of a person who is not seeing what is in front of them, but what could be, who is looking at a human being the way a sculptor looks at unworked stone, finding the form that is already inside it waiting to be revealed. She stopped. She tilted her head. "What did he tell you?" Celeste asked. "He told me you are the woman he is marrying today," Im Hyun-ja said, "and that I should dress you accordingly." "That is all?" He said. Im Hyun-ja paused, opening the first trunk with practiced hands, her fingers moving across folded fabrics with the ease of long familiarity. "He said that you belong to two worlds, and that both of them should be visible when you walk into that room." Celeste was quiet for a moment. "He said that?" "He said that," Im Hyun-ja confirmed without looking up. "Now, you have beautiful shoulders, extraordinary posture, and that hair." She gestured toward the crown of natural hair, the full black volume of it, the way it rose and spread like something sovereign. "That hair is not a problem to be solved. That hair is architecture. We build around it. We build with it." From the second trunk, she began to lift fabric. What came out was not what Celeste had expected, though she had not known, sitting at the window, what she had been expecting. The fabric was silk, deep and rich, and its color was a black so complete and so saturated that it seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. Against the black, threads of gold had been woven in patterns that Celeste could not immediately read, and then could, slowly, as Im Hyun-ja held the fabric toward the window and the morning light moved through it. Dragons, magnolia blossoms, branches that curved and interlocked the way living things curve and interlock, the way roots do underground, connecting things that appear separate on the surface. "This was made for a commission that was canceled," Im Hyun-ja said. 3 months ago. I kept it because I did not know yet who it was for." Her 3 assistants moved around Celeste with quiet efficiency, measuring, pinning, adjusting. The hanbok took shape around her body with a speed that was possible only because Im Hyun-ja had spent 33 years learning to read a body's geometry in minutes rather than hours. The jogori, the upper garment, was fitted close across Celeste's shoulders and chest before opening into the long, full chima that swept the floor around her feet. The gold organza, sheer and weightless, was attached at the shoulders and fell behind her like wings caught in a slow wind. Celeste watched herself in the mirror as the dress assembled itself around her. Something happened in her face. It was not dramatic. It was not the moment of cinematic transformation that the situation might have seemed to call for. It was quieter than that, and therefore more real. A subtle shift in the set of her jaw, a very small relaxation around her eyes, the particular expression of a person who has been holding themselves ready for the worst and has just been handed, unexpectedly, something entirely different. "She wanted to erase you," Priya said softly from the corner of the room where she had been watching in silence for the past 20 minutes. "And instead, you're going to walk in there wearing both worlds at once." Celeste looked at her in the mirror. "She gave me this," Celeste said, and her voice was steady and precise and carried in it no bitterness, only the clean, hard-edged clarity of a woman who has arrived at a truth through the worst possible route and has decided to carry it anyway. "I would have walked in there in my dress. Beautiful, emotional, grateful. She made me walk in there in this." A pause. "I'll send her a thank you note." Priya made a sound that was half laugh, half something that could not decide what it was. Im Hyunja, kneeling at the hem with pins between her lips, looked up briefly. "Hold still," she said, but her eyes were warm. Downstairs, in the ceremonial hall, the 240 guests had taken their seats. The string quartet had moved from rehearsal into performance, and the music that filled the hall was the particular kind of beauty that exists specifically to make people feel that what they are about to witness is significant. Which, on this occasion, it was, though not in the way most of them had anticipated when they accepted the invitation. The senior advisors who had been present in the winter garden when Junho spoke to his sister had, between the garden and the hall, exchanged 3 brief sentences with one another that amounted to a consensus. Whatever happened next, Kwon Junho had not wavered. This was, in the quiet arithmetic of people who spend their lives calculating the stability of powerful men, significant information. Loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that holds under pressure rather than performing only in comfortable conditions, was the rarest currency in the world they inhabited. They had just watched him demonstrate it in a direction most of them had not expected. Han Sung-jin sat in the front row. He was 62 years old, with a broad face and careful eyes, and the particular stillness of a man who has survived long enough in dangerous spaces to know that observation is more valuable than participation. Beside him, his wife, a small, elegant woman from Manila named Rosario, who wore a deep red dress and a string of pearls, and who had, in 15 years of marriage to one of Seoul's most powerful men, developed the ability to assess a room's temperature within 30 seconds of entering it, leaned slightly toward him. "Something happened," she murmured, "before the ceremony." "Yes," he said. "Is he all right?" Han Sung-jin considered the question with genuine care. "He is better than all right," he said finally. "He is decided." At the altar, Kwon Junho stood with his hands clasped in front of him. His tuxedo was immaculate. His posture was what it always was, straight, contained, the physical grammar of a man who understood that how you hold your body is a form of communication. The dragon tattoo climbed his neck in full visibility, unhidden, unapologetic. His face was composed, but his eyes were on the doors at the far end of the hall. And in those eyes, in the dark, still, usually unreadable eyes of the man that 240 people in this room had spent years being very careful not to misread, there was something completely, startlingly, nakedly visible. He was waiting for her. Not the way powerful men wait for things they expect to receive. the way a man waits for something he is not entirely sure he deserves, with a hope so large and so careful that it has made him, for this single, unguarded moment, entirely human. The music shifted. The doors at the end of the hall began to open, and every person in that room turned. The doors opened slowly, not because the mechanism was slow, but because the woman operating them, a junior member of the hotel's events staff, 22 years old, who had opened these particular doors at least 40 times in her 2 years of employment here, had paused instinctively, without instruction, the way people pause when they sense that what they are about to release into a room will change the nature of that room permanently. She was not wrong. Celeste Renee Washington stood at the threshold. The black and gold hanbok moved around her body like something that had been waiting for her, like a garment that had existed in potential for 33 years inside the imagination of a master craftwoman, and had finally, on this morning, in this city, found the person it had always been made for. The deep black silk absorbed the amber light of the chandeliers and gave nothing back, which made the gold embroidery blaze against it with a luminosity that was almost violent. The dragons curling upward along the fabric, the magnolia blossoms frozen mid-opening, the branches connecting everything to everything else in the intricate, patient language of things that grow. The gold organza fell from her shoulders and moved behind her as she walked, weightless and continuous, catching the air of the hall and spreading it backward like the train of something that had decided it was royal. Her hair rose in its full natural crown, white flowers pressed into it at intervals, not arranged to tame the volume, but arranged to honor it, to say, "This is what this is, and it is magnificent." The gold bracelet caught the light on her left wrist. Her mother's name, too small to read from a distance, too present to ignore. She walked with the specific posture of a woman who has already had the worst thing happen and has discovered, on the other side of it, that she is still standing, which is a different posture than confidence, deeper than pride, and infinitely more difficult to manufacture or perform. It cannot be learned. It can only be earned. And Celeste Renee Washington had earned it in ways that had nothing to do with this morning, and everything to do with every morning before it. Every morning of being the woman in the room who was not expected to be there. Every morning of deciding to be there anyway. Every morning of pressing a uniform flat and walking into spaces that had not been built with her in mind, and standing in them so completely that eventually the space had no choice but to accommodate her. The hall did not erupt immediately. There was a moment, 3, perhaps 4 seconds, of absolute collective stillness. The kind that happens when 240 people simultaneously encounter something they did not have a category for, and their minds require a brief, involuntary pause to build one. And then Han Sung-jin stood up. He rose from his seat in the front row with the deliberate, unhurried movement of a man who understands that standing is a statement. That in rooms where power is the primary language, the body is a word. And choosing to put it upright is a sentence that everyone present will read and remember. His wife, Rosario, stood beside him without hesitation, her pearls catching the light, her expression carrying the particular warmth of a woman who has spent 15 years being the person in the room that people did not expect to see there, and who recognized, across the aisle and the flowers and the distance, exactly what she was looking at. Others rose, not all at once, not with the uniformity of rehearsed response, but in the organic, cascading way that genuine reactions move through a group of people. 1, then 3, then a dozen, then the room, until 240 people were on their feet and the music of the string quartet was no longer the loudest thing in the hall. Kwon Jun-ho was crying. He did not hide it. He did not turn away or press his fingers to his eyes or perform any of the gestures that men in his position had been trained, explicitly and implicitly across their entire lives, to substitute for actual emotion. He stood at the altar and let the tears move down his face, past the jaw, past the edge of the dragon tattoo that climbed his neck, down onto the white collar of his shirt. And he kept his eyes on her, only on her, as she walked the full length of that aisle toward him. Later, people who had been in that room would try to describe what his face looked like in that moment. They would reach for words and find that the words available were insufficient. That the vocabulary of composed, powerful men breaking open in public is underdeveloped because it happens so rarely. Because the world conspires to prevent it.
Because the systems that create men like Kwon Jun-ho are specifically designed to ensure that this kind of visibility never occurs. And yet, there it was. Undeniable. Unrepeatable. Completely real. When Celeste reached the altar and stood in front of him, she looked at his face for a long moment. At the tears, at the tattoo, at the dark eyes that were showing her everything they contained without reservation or apology. And she did something that no one in the hall had predicted. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. Gently. The way you touch something you are making sure is real. He covered her hand with his own, his tattooed hand, large and warm, and held it there. The officiant, a distinguished man of 60 who had conducted ceremonies for 40 years and believed, until this morning, that he had seen every possible variation of what two people looked like when they decided to belong to each other, cleared his throat softly and waited. When the vows came, Jun-ho did not read from the paper that his assistant had prepared in consultation with the event coordinator and the officiant over the preceding 2 weeks. He had decided this sometime between the elevator and the altar, in the specific way that decisions are sometimes made not in moments of deliberation, but in moments of arrival. When you reach a place and understand, with sudden and complete clarity, what the place requires of you. He looked at Celeste, and he spoke. "My family taught me that strength is not bending," he said. His voice was quiet enough that the hall had to lean toward him to hear it. And leaning toward him was what 240 people immediately did. "You taught me that the greatest strength is choosing who you love out loud, in front of everyone, without apologizing to anyone." He paused. "I have spent my life being a man that people do not question. I would like to spend the rest of it being a man that you do not have to question." "That is a different thing. It is harder. I am aware of that. I am choosing it anyway." Then he turned. And this was the moment that the senior advisors would discuss quietly among themselves for months afterward. That Rosario Han would describe in detail to her sister on the phone that evening. That the junior event staff member who had opened the doors would remember for the rest of her working life. He turned to face the room. All of it. The advisors and the allies, and the representatives of families whose approval he had, for most of his adult life, treated as a necessary condition of his own existence. And he said, in Korean, in a voice that was no longer quiet, "Anyone who cannot respect my wife does not need to respect me." The words landed in the hall like stones dropped into still water. The initial impact clean and precise, and then the rings spreading outward, touching everything. Han Sung-jin began to applaud. Slowly. Deliberately.
The kind of applause that is not enthusiasm but endorsement. The kind that means something specific in rooms where approval is a currency and the person offering it understands exactly what they are spending. The hall followed. Not because they were instructed to, not because it was expected, but because 240 people had just watched a man choose, publicly and irrevocably, the harder and more honest version of himself. And there is something in that act, something in the specific courage of it, that bypasses calculation and reaches directly into the part of every person that knows, regardless of what their life has taught them to perform, what it looks like when something is true. So-Yun's flight to Jeju took 55 minutes. She sat in the window seat with her hands in her lap and looked at the clouds below the plane, and did not speak to the flight attendant who offered her water, and did not open the magazine that the person beside her had left on the shared armrest. She sat with the particular stillness of someone who is not at peace, but who has run out of the energy required for its opposite. She thought about her mother. She thought about the specific afternoon. She had been 14, Junho 16, when their mother had sat them both down in the kitchen of the house in Mapo and told them, with the calm of a woman who had already made her peace with difficult news, that she was sick and that she would not be getting better, and that the most important thing they could do with the years they had was to choose every day to be better to each other than the world was likely to be to them. So-Yun had carried that instruction for 17 years. She had understood it, she now realized somewhere over the Yellow Sea, as meaning protect each other from the world. What she had not understood, what she was beginning, slowly, painfully, with the particular reluctance of someone dismantling a belief they built their entire architecture around, was that her mother had not said from the world. She had said to each other. The distinction was not small. The house in Jeju was cold when she arrived. She turned on the heating and walked through the rooms that smelled of her grandmother's particular soap and the particular dust of a place that had been loved and then left. And she sat down at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table that had been there since before she was born, and she took out her phone. Junho's message was already there. She read it twice. Then she went to the bedroom where her mother's things were still kept in a carved wooden chest, untouched for 17 years, preserved with the specific reverence of grief that has not known how to complete itself. And she opened the chest and found, beneath 2 folded blankets and a stack of letters in her mother's handwriting, the jade necklace. She held it for a long time. Then she found a piece of paper and a pen. She was not accustomed to apology. The syntax of it was unfamiliar to her, the grammar of it uncomfortable in her hands. She wrote 3 sentences and crossed them out. She wrote 2 more and looked at them for a long time. Finally, she wrote only this: "My mother would have loved you." It takes me time to admit that, but it is true. She folded the paper. She found a small box in the kitchen drawer. She placed the necklace inside it, placed the note on top, closed the box, and set it on the table. She sat in the cold kitchen of the house where her mother had grown up, in the quiet of an island that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. And she allowed herself to feel, without defense or performance, the full and specific weight of what she had done and what it had cost, and what it might, if she was willing to do the harder work of honesty, eventually make possible. It was not redemption. Not yet. But it was the first true thing she had allowed herself in a very long time. 3 weeks later, Celeste sat at the desk in their apartment in Gangnam. the jade necklace in her palm, the note open in front of her. She read the 3 sentences twice. She thought about her mother, about the woman who had pressed a uniform flat every morning, who had cleaned other people's houses without bitterness, who had raised a daughter she believed deserved every room she would ever walk into. She thought about what it cost a person to write 3 true sentences when their whole life had been built on a different kind of language. She picked up a pen. She wrote, "When you are ready for coffee, I will be here." She sealed it. She addressed it to Jeju. And then Celeste Renee Washington, sommelier, consultant, daughter of a woman whose name she wore on her wrist, wife of a man who had cried in front of 240 people and not looked away, set the envelope on the desk, placed the jade necklace carefully beside it, and looked out the window at the city of Seoul. It was not her city.
It was not her city either. It was the place where she had walked into a room that was not built for her, in a dress that had been made for her in 40 minutes by a woman who understood that belonging is not granted. It is constructed, carefully, with the right materials, by hands that know what they are doing. She touched the bracelet on her wrist. "I got here, Mama," she said quietly. "I got here." Outside, Seoul moved in its enormous and continuous way, indifferent and alive, the way cities are. Full of rooms, full of doors, full of people deciding in every moment who they are going to be.
What did you think about this story? Before you go, let me introduce myself. My name is Angela Denise Carter, and I help women recognize emotional confusion, stop losing themselves in unhealthy patterns, and start seeing clearly again. And I want to ask you something. Did any part of this story feel a little too familiar? Because many women do not realize when they begin to lose themselves. It happens slowly, in the mixed signals, in the constant doubt, in the habit of explaining away what already hurts. And before they know it, they are giving too much, accepting too little, and calling confusion something they just need to be patient with. If that spoke to you, I want you to know this does not have to keep being your pattern. I created something to help women see more clearly, protect their dignity, and stop accepting less than they deserve. If you feel ready, you can access it right now through the QR code on the screen, the link in the description, or the pinned comment.
If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room where someone decided, before you even opened your mouth, that you did not belong there? And how did you find the strength to stand anyway? Have you ever been the person who confused protecting someone you love with controlling who they are allowed to love? And if you have ever been in a moment where someone tried to humiliate you into smallness, did you let them? Or did you find, somewhere inside yourself, the same thing Celeste found? That what was meant to destroy you can become the most powerful thing you ever wear. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, love, and redemption, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.